Okay, here we are again, and if I'm looking a little bit tired and worn out today, and I sound a little bit haggard, um, don't blame me. I've just done a 3-hour lecture, and I just thought that it'd be good to, while it's still fresh, go through some of the main points. And the great thing about doing it with you guys after I've done it in class is that I can see which things work and which things don't work, and which things I need to clarify a bit more clearly. Okay, so 2 topics, 2 chapters this week, so it's a biggie. Part of the reason that it's loaded up heavily at the early part of the semester is that we've got these first 2 weeks we've got no real assessment happening in this course, actively happening, but from now on it starts to get serious, so we start to revert to a single chapter basically per week. Looking forward to that. I can tell you my voice is looking forward to that. So we've got 2 topics, perceiving ourselves and others, and emotions and attitudes, and stress and things like that, fun stuff. This first stuff is very obvious. It's to do with self-concept and self-beliefs and self-evaluations. Beliefs, we'll be talking further about beliefs, but beliefs relate to those kind of like semi-factual statements about oneself, like, I'm a good person, or I am appreciative of people who help others, for example. Self-evaluations is the whole collection of evaluations you make about yourself in answering those big questions about how do I feel about myself, or who am I, what am I. Now, in relation to the workplace, we will find that that the self-concept, particularly for men, is very heavily connected to their job. I just receive a phone call. Sorry about that. Connected to their job. Males, if you ask them, tell me about yourself. Like if you're on a date with a guy and ask him about himself, he's more than likely, better than 50% chance they're going to talk about their job, rather than, for example, I'm a caring person. Women have less of a tendency to do that. When we're talking about also real self-concept versus ideal self-concept, the real self-concept is the concept that you can derive from objective measures of performance against an objective standard, what friends and family think of you. If you build up a picture that's more three-dimensional as opposed to your own relatively ideal view of yourself, you can get a better picture of who you are answering those questions. The 3 C's relate to 3 characteristics of one's self-concept. Complexity relates to having a number of different roles, for example, in part of one's self-concept. So you can think of yourself as being a mother, a wife, an aid worker, a charity worker, whatever. You have job roles and you have home roles, and you can have multiple home roles. People with highly complex selves tend to be, women are more commonly have some complex selves. Clarity is the degree of distinction or understanding of you have about those selves, and consistency is the degree to which you use a particular set of personality traits across a number of different roles. So consistent across roles. So for example, if you're a caring mum, but at work requires you to be an aggressive lawyer, then that's not a consistent way of doing things. And it's interesting to note that all 3 of these concepts, having complex, clear, and consistent selves, leads to better well-being. Just going through a few of these terms. Self-enhancement relates to the measures we take to try and enhance and protect a positive self-concept. Self-verification is about collecting evidence to affirm and verify who we are, what we thought we were. The social self is the part of ourself that refers to how you define yourself in terms of golf club membership, or whether you're an Essendon supporter or a Broncos supporter. Self-evaluation is that process of working out yourself, and we'll talk about the issues of self-esteem, efficacy, and locus of control, which are important aspects of how you see yourself and how you feel about yourself. Okay, so self-enhancement tends to lead to a false increase in the degree to which you think you cause things to go right. And it tends to lead to overestimates of one's own probability of succeeding at particular tasks. But it has positive impacts on physical and psychological health. A classic example is that, in fact, during my PhD, I did work on the issue of self-deception. And one of the really ironic things that I learnt from that process was that people who have accurate self-perception, accurate self-views, self-knowledge, tend to be more depressed than those who are self-deceptive. Not great to know that, but it's just how it is. Unfortunately, we need to delude ourselves in order to stay happy. Self-verification, it tends to lead us to collect information that confirms what we want to hear. It reduces our interaction with people who disagree with ourselves, so we tend to collect ourselves in groups of yes men, you could say, people who tend to back us up, have our back, always think we're right, or at least say so. Like friends, for example, we tend to not collect around us friends who badger us and tell us where we're going wrong. Self-verification does tend to stabilise the self-concept, may stabilise it in a false area. Now, in relation to self-evaluation, higher self-esteem means that you're less influenced by the outside. So again, in relation to the depressives and the people versus what we call normals, if you like, people who are depressed are more influenced by input from outside than people who have high self-esteem. Self-efficacy is a concept worth talking about. It's the ability to which you feel that you can enact an activity or a role, carry out something successfully. It often comes from mastery or sense of mastery, or from having experienced a particular project type or a particular problem, a particular challenge or a particular task. You've experienced it before and you develop, as you go, a greater sense of self-efficacy. You can have general self-efficacy or focused self-efficacy, and it leads to greater belief in one's ability, greater motivation to do it, greater enjoyment, actually. Internal locus of control. Locus of control basically means location of control. It's a fancy Greek word again. Locus of control produces higher self-evaluation and greater belief over personal control over life events and misadventures. So effectively, locus of control refers to when those occasions where you feel that you can enact power over a situation. So for example, when you go and visit your mother-in-law, a very dominant figure, or father-in-law, and you have to stay at their house, you'll feel yourself shriveling back a little bit into almost like a younger version of yourself, because you are in a powerless situation, and you are effectively, your locus of control shifts from when you're in your own home with your own family. You can feel empowered and strong and have an impact. But when you're at someone else's house, particularly the mother-in-law, and you have developed a weak sense of external, what we call external locus of control. The social self, social identity also depends, not your own identity depends not on just who you are and who you think you are, but which groups you belong to. So, Wayne Rooney, the Baldy there, he plays for Manchester United. He identifies himself not just as a football player, as a Manchester United football player. And it also relates to who he thinks he is not. He's most certainly not a Manchester City football player, one of the blue guys there. And, with particular groups that are highly consistent, so if you get, for example, all Manchester United players wear red and Manchester City players wear blue, it helps to distinguish the groups clearer and lead to a stronger sense of social identification with the group. We identify groups that support self-enhancement, which is kind of not obvious. Perception. It's fairly obvious, I won't go into it too much, but it relates to both receiving information, making sense of it, and determining which information we pay attention to, and categorizing, organizing it, and interpreting that information. That's the field of perception. Big field in psychology. Just take a look at this screen. I'll hold it static and look at one part of the screen and see what happens. You'll notice that the wheels appear to turn. What the point that the reason I showed this up, that this particular thing is called a microsaccade, slight movements of the eye cause the thing to appear to be moving. It's because the human perceptual system is an interesting and evolving system. Here's a picture of a baby going across a glass table, which has been cunningly arranged so that it looks like there's a big drop there at that point where it looks like it falls down. Now, as kids get older, they realize, they use their visual perception to see that's a drop and that means danger and I won't go there. But little babies actually don't see the danger. They just follow the glass and head towards their mum, quite blithely innocent of the fact that this represents visual danger. So humans have a very peculiar need for change and coherence, and these two things don't operate together. I don't want to give you too much of a lesson on perception, but just very briefly. There was an experiment that took place in Germany. No, I won't give you the experiment. I'll just give you an example. If you have a piano in the house, or if you visit someone who has got a piano, and play a single note which is attached to a string which is taut at a certain level, and effectively the idea behind a piano is you press that key, you will get the note C or the note D or E or whatever. You'll get exactly that note every time. If you press it harder, you might get a bit louder or a bit softer, but you'll get that single note each time. But if you were to press that note time and time again, bing, 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 and do it time and time again in fairly quick succession, your ear would hear a different note. And this is part of a general problem, or general aspect, not even a problem, general feature of the perceptual system. The perceptual system requires change. Do you know, if you could focus your eyes just for a moment, or not for a moment, for let's say a couple of minutes, onto a single object without having those microsaccades, those little eye movements that you get, that are completely spontaneous, you can't stop them, but scientists have managed to stop them, and force you to look at the one thing all the time. Guess what happens? A very Harry Potter-like thing. It disappears. So the perceptual system needs change in order to generate information. But also, we need stability or coherence, as I say here. So humans tend to impose their belief and attitude systems and their cultural values on what they see, and they see very different things based on who they are. And we'll be talking about that over the course of this course, but it's something, those two conflicting things. We need to interpret things in order to give them meaning, and we tend to do that by clustering things together and relating, oh, that reminds me of something that happened in the past, or this is similar to that, and that type of thing. I think we can skip that slide. Okay, attribution theory. It's a general theory whereby when individuals observe behaviour, they tend to try to determine whether their own behaviour or other people's behaviour is caused by internal things, for example, personality, or the fact that they're tired, for example, or external things. Oh, there's a full moon above us, so no wonder she's crazy because there's a full moon. So we assume that a problem is you and not the situation. I'm talking about you in general. We assume that it's internal, you, not the situation, which is external. If you show the same behaviour in different situations, which is called distinctiveness, if other people don't act the same way you do in that same situation, which is called consensus, or if you always act this way, which is called consistency, those three characteristics tend to make us have an internal attribution theory. So there's a number of errors that we make in relation to this, and this screenshot for you shows those errors. fundamental attribution error is the one we'll turn to first. It's the tendency to underestimate the influence of external factors on our behaviour and other people's behaviour, and overestimate the influence of internal factors when making judgments about where to attribute behaviour to. Selective perception is this general process, which I kind of alluded to before, where we interpret what we see on the basis of our background. So we interpret our reality upon reality. We don't exactly see an objective reality to the same degree. And I could give you many, many beautiful examples that will make you stop and think. But take it from me, because we haven't got time, that in fact we impose ourselves upon reality in a sometimes quite hysterically funny way. Self-serving biases is the tendency for individuals to attribute their own success to internal factors while blaming external factors for their failure. So if I succeed at the exam, it's because I'm smart. If I fail at the exam, it's because my wife kept me up late last night, for example. I'm not married, but so to speak. So external factors for failures, internal factors for success. The halo effect is drawing a general impression. There's various forms of halo effect, like primacy effect is one, where our first impressions colour what we think about something. Halo effect is a little bit more specific than that. It's when we get a particular single characteristic that shines out from someone, we then just form all sorts of general and probably fallacious, as in fallacy, as in fault, impressions about them on the basis of that single characteristic. Stereotyping is a kind of like a form of halo effect, but we're talking about, of course, like a particular group of people. You think that every Indian person loves cricket, for example, or that Scottish people tend to be tight with their money, for example. That's stereotyping. Contrast effects is where what you judge a person by is coloured by people you recently encountered or who rank higher or lower on the same characteristics. So an example that I would give is that, just a bit of a light example. If you spend 6 weeks on a desert island and you're the average single guy, when you come off that island, every single girl you meet looks hot, simply because of the contrast between no girl, some girl. It's just a quick and easy just example, but we do judge quality in looks, but also in performance relative to other people, and they can be quite objectively wrong. Self-fulfilling prophecy, we have talked a little bit about this, but effectively it's powerful early on in a relationship, so that self-fulfilling prophecy is where you anticipate with a new employee, for example, that they are going to be great. Your expectation about their performance impacts on their actual performance, has mainly impact early on. It's if people around you or your managers think this particular person is going to be great, then generally that will increase the likelihood that they'll be great. And unfortunately, when expectations are low rather than high, that self-fulfilling prophecy is particularly powerful. So, for example, if you and your managers think someone's going to be awful, but you're taking them on because the job market's tight and there's no one else, then their performance is more likely to be bad than if the flip side, where you all expect that their performance will be great. So unfortunately, this works against you. And in fact, it's best for managers to adopt a positive, but of course still realistic expectation towards new staff, for example. So improving your perception skills, you need to be aware of all these processes and biases, which of course, as as a student within people, work and organisations, you're increasing your awareness now. And also the fifth bullet point's a big one. Have meaningful interaction with people, as opposed to, and close frequent interaction, as opposed to just trivial contact with someone. Now, I flicked through these bullet points a little bit just to make a kind of general point here about that interaction business. There are studies showing that, for example, we typically think that being a tourist is kind of, apart from the fact it's fun, is kind of good for you because it develops an international sense of how the world is, and you become more tolerant of minorities, for example, and tolerant of different cultures. But that tends to be true when it is meaningful. So there's studies that I've seen of, for example, Arabs going to visit Israel or Israelis going to visit Arabic countries, and looking at whether that changes their actual underlying attitudes towards, this very fraught issue. But it tends to show that just visiting Bethlehem and looking at the ancient sites doesn't really improve people's tolerance of Israelis, or Arabic tolerance or understanding. But if they do spend time on the kibbutz and work with the Israelis on a close basis for a few months, then in fact, it does make a change. The world does become a more peaceful place. Okay, moving to the second chapter, emotions and attitudes. Great little Harry Potter thing. I'll just play a bit of it because if it works. If it doesn't work, no, it doesn't work, so I'm going to cancel that and hope that it doesn't start up. It'd be really annoying if it does. Okay, so attitudes, we've talked a little bit about it previously, and I'm just going to turn up the volume so that I can hear if that Harry Potter thing starts annoying us. So attitudes are clusters of belief. If we just go over here, beliefs, affects, and intentions. So the three things are kind of like knowledge about something, emotions about it, and intentions to act. And you know what? As a single predictor of behavior, intentions is a relatively new player in psychology, in the psychology of attitude-behavior relations. And we found that if we take intention into impact, for example, your intention to study hard and your intention to put the hours into this subject is a very good predictor of the actual hours and success that you'll have in the subject. But we don't measure it just by yes, no. We tend to measure it by a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 7, for example. So if you say 10 out of 10 certainty that you intend to study at least 15 to 20 hours a week on the topic, then that's a very much better predictor than just asking, do you find education important, or would you like to have a master's degree, for example. That's not a particularly good predictor. So beliefs are established perceptions, feelings are the affects, and then intentions are the intention to act. So that's fairly self-obvious. We've done cognitive dissonance. And emotions can impact on behaviour either indirectly through providing information on valence, which is, valence is kind of like positive, negative about a particular situation. And emotions do tend to operate on the less cognitive level, less brain level, in providing feedback on things that in our environment. For example, in how we interact with staff, it may be based upon an emotional reaction to them, which provides us with some sort of information on good badness, for example. But also emotions can directly impact on behaviour. There's some emotions that are kind of like instinctive and, reactions that are caused by things that are at a subconscious level and we have no control over them. For example, facial expressions. We'll skip over that. Definition of emotion. I'll skip over that one too. And that one. So emotions are feelings. They tend to be directed at something or someone. We have a broad range of feelings, which is called, another word for emotions is affect. But when there's trait-like feelings that lack a contextual cue, so for example, if we tend to be gloomy for day on end, regardless of what's on telly or regardless of what we had for breakfast, that tends to be described as being a mood. Great book, if you ever get a chance to read this, great book. It's a few years old now, Passions Within Reasons, but it's a book that talks about how emotions can motivate people on to do the right thing. So emotions actually have some kind of rational purpose because they help us to feel good about doing the right thing that has no immediate payoff, but in the long term actually helps us build a reputation as being a good person, which then has a payoff. And all sorts of other things like that, how emotions can actually make sense. Nice title, actually, Passions Within Reason, because of course we tend to think of, I think I may have put an S there by mistake, but we tend to think of emotions as being kind of brainless and no point to them. And, emotions can have a range. You can have a high degree of emotion, such as anxiety, which is negative, like stress, or high degree of emotion, which is positive, like excitement, and on the other end, boredom and relaxation are the two dimensions, positive and negative, that you can get there. What triggers emotion? A great deal of things. Personality, for example. Extroversion is extroverts tend to be happier than introverts. Neurotics tend to be less happy. We tend to be happier on Monday, for example, than we are, happier on Friday than we tend to be on Monday quite naturally. And a few of these other things are all variables that do affect and govern emotions. Just want to spend a moment on emotional labour, and we may come back to this subject later. I won't play the clip from Richard Branson because I can explain it more compactly than that. We're already at the 25-minute mark. And so emotional labour relates to the kind of things you bring to a job that are kind of requirements of a job, either fully expectations or unspoken expectations. So Richard Branson's talking about air hostesses. He doesn't talk too much detail, but air hostesses is a great example where they always are calm and happy and caring and supportive and attentive, and they smile, and they have to deliver all these emotions. But nurses, on the other hand, they have to deliver a different set of emotions. They have to be sympathetic, caring, concerned, worried. They have to demonstrate appropriate emotions. I once had a very unfortunate encounter with a oncologist. My wife got cancer, and she actually passed away, and the oncologist was incredibly poor, as a lot of very brainy people can be at emotional labour. So he had no idea how to transmit bad news and how to act, really. He was quite poor at it. So it's not about only IQ, but and it's not only about a single kind of emotion. The thing that is worth mentioning is that there can be deep acting versus surface acting. So deep acting is where you actually really take on the role as opposed to just give lip service to the emotions required. In the McDonald's example of would you like fries with that, thank you, etc. That's all very artificial and very easy to put on, but some of the things like nursing, where it requires a deeper level, and apparently that has been found reliably to be more stressful. Hochschild is the person who came up with this. Positivity offset, I've spelt that wrongly, but it's a finding which I hadn't known before I read the textbook, actually, that when people are somewhere between positive, very positive feeling happy, and very negative feeling unhappy, they actually interpret that kind of neutral feeling as positive, so kind of shift it mentally towards the positive. That's why it's called offset, to shift. Most people rate their lives most of the time as not bad. So personality, I went through that before. Stress, that's fairly obvious. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And in fact, we really should talk about it now, but my slides are slightly in the wrong order. We'll come back to stress in a moment. But emotional intelligence is from this guy. Sorry, I keep swinging in and out. I'm kind of got nothing better to do, have I? Daniel Goleman is the guy who made it famous, but it wasn't his initial research. He was just a journalist. He wrote a New York Times best-selling book on emotional intelligence, which I think is called Emotional Intelligence, if you want to look it up. Very, very trendy subject. A lot of managers are now using EI, or EQ, as they call it, instead of IQ, to determine whether people are good for teamwork or whether they're good employees just generally. The jury is a little bit out. Researchers don't agree on definitions, and there's also a feeling hard to measure, and that in fact IQ and EQ are quite highly correlated and not that big difference. It also relates to the theory of mind, and I will briefly play this very cute Oh, let's see if the damn thing works. Yes, it does work.
Sister, where did you put that ball?
I don't know, you have to find it.
Okay.
Kindergarten is a really exciting time. One of the developmental hallmarks at this age is that children develop this awareness that other people have different thoughts and feelings than they do. This is called theory of mind.
Because he thought it was.
You thought it was, that's right.
The first test we did was this representational change booklet, which shows different animals.
I won't show you the whole thing. You can always Google that yourself if you go Theory of Mind on YouTube, and you'll be able to see very quickly which video that one will be. But effectively, when we're born, we have a very poor theory of mind. Babies tend to think the whole world is literally them. So quite often, normal babies, if their mother gets upset, they'll get upset. If they're hungry, they assume that everybody knows, which is why they get so frustrated when they're not fed, because they think, well, can't you tell that I'm hungry? You know, that they don't have a strong theory of what other people perceive. And as we get older, we do develop a stronger theory of mind. We won't go on this, and we will skip this slide because this issue of emotional regulation is the ability to control yourself effectively and control negative emotions. It's not in the textbook, I don't think, which is why I'm ditching it, because I want to focus on what you need to get through and the curriculum. So job satisfaction is evaluation of job and work context, attitude about specific aspects of the job, EVLN, exit, voice, loyalty and neglect. Exit refers to leaving the business. Voice refers to the voice of the employer and the employee. Loyalty, again, it relates to the passion which one has towards the business, and neglect is the opposite, when people are neglectful and non-caring and negative at work. And however, the research does show, and this is worth remembering, that unhappy workers can surprisingly be still quite effective. However, there is a correlation between happiness, job satisfaction, and productivity. And there's this issue, this second issue of customer satisfaction through better employee behaviour arising out of job satisfaction. And the service chain model is kind of nice. It's this employees first, customers second, which is kind of a reverse to the mantra, the customer always comes first, the client always comes first. Service profit chain, and Richard Branson spoke in the video that I didn't show you about this. He didn't speak directly about the topic, but he just said, look, if we give goods, if we look after our staff and they're happy, they will behave well and enjoy their work. They will then deliver a quality product to the customer, and we will subsequently get client satisfaction, this is this stage here, and client loyalty, and subsequently make money. So that's how that works. Even though you put the employees first, effectively by doing so, you're putting the company first. That's the service profit chain. Organisational commitment has two components, the effective and continuance commitments. Effective is where you really, really care about the organisation. You get passionate about it, you get involved, you get attached to it. And good emotions. Continuance is kind of like a surface attachment or commitment to the organisation. I'll cling on to this job until I retire. I'll just continue to take the pay packet, put in the hours, but no more. That's a continuous emotion or continuance attitude. And of course, effective attachment does have some nice results in terms of retention, motivation, OCBs, remember, organisational citizenship behaviours, as well as performance, customer satisfaction. However, it can have some negatives in terms of conformity and lack of willingness to take risks, which relates to creativity. Continuance can, of course, lead to lower performance and less organisational citizenship behaviours. I think we'll skip this one. Okay, and we'll skip that one. Focus on stress. Now, stress is an adaptive response it may sound a little bit strange to call it adaptive to a situation that's perceived as challenging or threatening. There's two kinds of adaptive responses, because they can be positive adaptation or negative adaptation. So eustress refers to positive stress. So for example, the excitement you feel when you are about to meet your girlfriend after a months apart or weeks apart. Your arousal levels go up, you get sweatier, you get heart rate level goes up. These are some of the physiological symptoms of stress, and yet you feel good. That's eustress. It has both those physiological and psychological. The physiological is the heart rate, and the psychological, of course, is how you feel. But the physiological consequences of stress can include negatives like hypertension, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease and headaches. And on the positive, on the psychological component, can include, dissatisfaction, moodiness, burnout, which is a severe form of long-term exposure to stress, where people actually quit jobs, for example. It also has behavioural components such as absenteeism or aggression, poor decision making, and lower work performance, and accidents. So it's a very serious. Watching the stress levels within a workplace has very serious implications for the business. Now, the general adaptation syndrome, Hans Selye, that's this chap. His research is quite old, like I think 1950s, but still very relevant. And he talks about the 3 stages: alarm, where you recognise a risk or a threat, and get that heart rate up, etc. And the stressor starts to pick up. We then have resistance to it, where we try and cope with it and respond to it. And finally, if it persists, you get this level called exhaustion, which he was. There's some very interesting studies with animals showing that, relatively cruel experiments showing that this kind of stress, persistent stress, can literally kill. I don't know why we're going through these ones again. Oh, yes. So stresses include, in the workplace, bullying behaviour, harassment, and harassment is repeated and unwanted conduct, including verbal comments, but they can also include cases of absence of behaviour. So, for example, if everybody ostracises or avoids a particular employee and doesn't speak to them even when they're spoken to, and just minimum contact with them, that can be construed as bullying, and in fact does have legal implications for the employer when people treat other people in that way. Work overload is a common stressor, of course, and that relates to working hours, and there's a level that's been set at the EU, the European Union, of 48 hours. Anything beyond that becomes a major stressor. Don't I know? And low or no control. So I've talked about the power of giving control. So you'll typically find that white-collar senior managers experience stress more as eustress, that positive stress, and blue-collar lower workers who are downtrodden within the organisation tend to experience that challenge as more stressful because they have less control over a situation. Talking about individual differences in, the textbook highlights workaholism, and it's worth noting that even though workaholics have very high work involvement and put in a lot of hours and are driven to work, they don't necessarily enjoy it. So a big contrast with alcoholics to some degree is that, whereas we all enjoy one beer and perhaps another, it's not quite like work. So that term is a little bit contested. I have done some research in that area. Managing work stress, you've got a number of different responses you can take, including removing the stressor. So imagine if there was a bully in a particular work team and a particular person was getting bullied. You could remove the bully. You could remove the person who was getting bullied from the bully. You could talk to the person who was getting bullied and say, look, Brian's always been like this. He's got problems. You're just going to have to cope, but come and talk to me about it any time. So trying to, that also relates to the final one, receive counselling and support. But you can also control consequences of the stress. I mean, classic example there is take a pill. But it's, of course, not an ideal way to deal with bullying. And in fact, as a manager, I would highly recommend that you don't do that because there are legal implications of not getting it right. And thanks very much. And 38 minutes, not too bad. Any questions, please do email me as usual. A lot of you are doing that, and please do keep a close eye on your CQU email address. And one other thing that came up in the class today, the physical class, was textbook. I strongly, strongly, strongly urge you to buy the textbook. Don't try and do without it. If necessary, buy a second-hand one, but buy the textbook, particularly as external students, absolutely critical. I suspect all of you have done that, but just a quick reminder on that. Good. Keep an eye on Moodle as well, and good luck. We'll talk to you soon.